Hey everybody, welcome back to your Donna Drones podcast. I'm Don Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are kicking off a brand new month. It is actually October, I cannot believe it. And this month is dedicated to the theme of tech ecosystem. And the sponsor of this month and a great role model for this month is who we have with us as our guest today, Don Berchoff from TruWeather Solutions. A friend to this show and probably to many of you that are already out there. So great to have you back on the show, Don.
Oh, Dawn, thanks for having me. I love talking weather and technology, as you know.
Absolutely. And, this drone industry, advanced air mobility, VTOL is not possible without having a handle on the weather. And I know that's your life's mission. So let's talk a little bit about you, Don. I mean, probably a lot of folks out there already know you. And by the way, if you don't know him well, you guys need to watch our Full Tilt episode with Don. He goes through his whole background and how he sparked his passion for weather when he was just 7 years old. So it's such a great show. Absolutely check that out. But Don, tell us a little bit about your background.
Dawn, like you said, I grew up in New York, and 7 years old, there was a big snowstorm in New York City. I almost got the mayor fired, and I don't know what it is about weather. It's always been a curiosity. Most weather people know when they're very young, they want to be meteorologists. And I think it has to do with curiosity. But I started then, and I just got my degree in meteorology and joined the Air Force and got to do some really fun things in the Air Force, right? I mean, really applying weather intelligence to mission execution and really effectiveness of delivering the capabilities that the military needed. Weather is so weather sensitive, all the operations. Got to run an Air Force base. So the cool thing was I got to run an Air Force base and a logistics base and be a weather person. I have some really great stories about how I kept the base open because I understood the weather and I understood the operations. In most cases, it would have been shut down. We had 12 inches of snow in 5 hours and we kept it up.
Wow.
But then I left the military and went into the Weather Service 4 years, working on technology as the science and technology director, and learned a lot about all the great capabilities that are trapped in the labs and universities that are just not getting out through the system. And, this is not a criticism of the government, but, there's limitations of what it could do. And the advancement of technology is so fast. We've come to depend on the government for all our weather for so many years. But the challenge now is we've got to get more public-private partnerships going. We got to unleash this power. And I saw all that technology. So I left the CERT government and went in and started my own company in 2015 with the whole idea that we were going to unlock the power of science and technology. We're going to get this data and this capabilities directly to commercialization, and we weren't going to have to depend on the government as a choke point to get it through. And I think that I've always said that I think the weather industry is underperforming in the economy, and it's not because people aren't working hard. It's not because we don't have really smart people. It's because the system really is built in a way that doesn't allow us to get out this stuff quickly enough, this new technology. And so what I want to do is get our performance to match what the requirements are. And we picked this industry because it's so weather sensitive. And it's the best business case ever for justifying expenditure in new infrastructure for microweather, because the industry is going to need it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get more in the problem statement. And of course, we're going to talk right now about your company. And we've got a quick video to roll. So let's roll that. I love that. And of course, the lightning at the end, because that is not what you want to see when you're trying to operate. But the video did a great job. But I love to also hear in your words, Don, what exactly TruWeather Solutions does.
Our focus is on collecting data and turning that into useful insights for end users to make better decisions, right? And in our case, it's weather data, it's micro weather data, it's analytics that go into processing that data, and really the analytics help us focus on the pain points of a specific industry. In this case, it's the drone industry, and the pain points are very clear to us and to the operators. So we work on that to really hone that information. And we offer this through a whole host of services for our SaaS platform, V360, and also through our professional services and consulting, where sometimes you just have to talk to a human in weather. Weather is just, it's still a lot of art. There's a lot of science, but there's a lot of art too because of the lack of data. So that's what we do. We just try to help you get more flight time. We want to get back 30% of what you would lose otherwise in flight time without having more certainty and better data.
On that slide we just had up, it said weather tax, right? And you had trademarked that term. Tell us what you mean by that.
Tax is something that came out of, I was at an eVTOL Insights conference last November, and there was an OEM brief and how much they were going to fly their new aircraft, for air taxi services in certain cities. And what I recognized pretty quickly sitting there was they really were talking about revenue numbers that had not included what I considered the weather impacts on their operations. There's a lot there, there's weather you can't do, there's some weather you can't do anything about, right? It's just what it is, right? But there's also this area, this bubble where, there's uncertainty that causes weather cancellations and delays. So I like to call the weather tax, I define it as Mother Nature's, price Mother Nature imposes upon your operations, whether it's real or perceived. And perceived is where people think something might happen, but it doesn't really happen. So that's part of the weather tax, right? You're paying a price for that. And most of the time, it's about 30%. Really, the weather tax is about 30%. Of course, it changes based on areas you're in the country. But the bottom line is that I tell people, like a good accountant, we can help you get back a refund on that weather tax, some of that weather tax. And that's what we're focusing on in TruWeather.
Awesome. Now, obviously, that's part of the problem statement, and you alluded to it earlier when you mentioned choke points in the government as an example. Amazing things happening in academia that are not maybe translating over, time lags, and low altitude weather, microclimate in particular challenges. So let's focus on the microclimate and the exact problem statement that we're looking at there, because I don't know that people fully appreciate. If people look out the window and, oh, it's raining or it's not, right? Or even if they're visual line of sight and they're a drone pilot, right? Because we talked about this on Clubhouse, right? We had Fire Mech Tech Rob on there from California saying, I could be standing there and my guys back in the ops center are telling me it's clear, and I'm flying this thing out, less than a mile, and it's hitting a patch of fog, half a mile out. So tell us about this microclimate problem statement that you're trying to solve in TruWeather.
Well, microclimates have always existed, right? When you drive in the country in the morning, you could go in and out of a fog bank. You could go from clear to a localized fog in a valley or with the river. You've lived in Florida where you can have rain on one side of the street, not on the other side of the street. Even at airports, we have microclimates. It's kind of interesting. The observations that are taken at an airport, everybody considers that gospel. Like, one question I get all the time is, well, how relevant is the observation at the airport to the area around the airport? And I say, it depends. I said, the only thing I can guarantee you is that the observation at that location it's taken is accurate. I can't tell you 10 feet away or 20 feet away if it's accurate. I've been on Air Force bases where, we're reporting I almost got thrown out of Korea by a fighter pilot, because we were at Kunsan, and my observers were calling the aerodrome visibility 7 miles, but they were diverting because on approach end of the runway, they couldn't see the runway. And so this is the kind of stuff I've lived with my whole life. So I know the limitations in our current weather systems. I understand the microclimates. And microclimates, we got away with it for many years with the current aviation weather system. If you talk to helicopter pilots, they'll tell you that it scared the hell out of them sometimes, right? Because they didn't know what's going on. And a lot of those microclimates are not captured in our models. They're not captured in our data. We cannot measure. We have very few measurements below 5,000 feet. We do 2 balloon launches a day at 77 locations, and we have aircraft that land at airports that come through the lowest 2,000 feet of the atmosphere. We get some data, but 97% of the country, we do not know what the real cloud height is.
That's 97%. And Don, even you're talking even just at the airport, if those readings are accurate at all. But someone like Fire Mech Tech Rob, who's out on the coast, for example, in California, may not be near that airport at all, and that's the weather. I think that maybe his app is pulling up.
Right. So a lot of folks are canceling missions because they want to follow the rules, and I credit them for that. And I think it's good that you are following the rules. But when you're 10 miles away from an airport and it's reporting a 300-foot ceiling, and you're outside and your ceiling is maybe 800 feet, but you don't know that because nobody can really determine that without measurements. Even weather observers can't. You're grounding yourself when you could fly. And the bottom line is if we could get some more sensors in these areas, one of the ideas I have for municipalities is you put an $80,000 census suite package, and you can get the cloud height, you can get the visibility, you get that all integrated into a one-stop shop, and turn that back around. Now you have real data. You're not depending on a METAR 20 miles away or a model that's not going to pick up that local microclimate, because models can't pick up something you can't measure. And we're not measuring a lot. And so the models are based on estimates, and they're using that airport observation, which is 300 feet, in their model. So now you have an error 20 miles away because the model can't know what it doesn't know. And I think we've gotten away a lot with the microclimate problem because there's pilots on airplanes. And, honestly, we would not be flying if there was no pilots, because they're the best weather sensor we have. And they are the ones that pick up heuristics, and that over time they pick up patterns. And they're actually a thinking component of the weather system on that aircraft. Now you take the pilot off, everything's unknowable beyond visual line of sight. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't be flying. I'm not trying to scare anybody here. I want to help solve the problem. And you're going to run into this problem anyway, whether I tell you about it and you want to deal with it or not, because you're eventually going to have an issue or an incident, and it's going to impact your risk management framework. And so what we want to do is get more certainty out there so we can open up the airspace and we understand what's happening to get you more flight time. And we've proven this in the Air Force, which we could talk about later, that this works, right? This is what we did in the military.
Well, it comes down to, like you said, having additional sensors and monitoring the area. You just mentioned maybe a municipality, $30,000 package or whatever. How do you obtain the superior weather data?
Well, the only way you can obtain superior weather data is by having the infrastructure to collect it, right? So keep in mind that satellites are great. They've done amazing things for our predictability. It's almost a marvelous science that we could forecast a hurricane is going to form over the Atlantic in 7 days in advance. It really is. But that's at the macro scale. And the satellites do not help us in the micro scale forecast. They can't see through the atmosphere. So what we have is a big data gap that we have to fill. And the only way you're going to fill it is with sensors. And superior data comes from better data, better sensors. And that's what we're working on in TruWeather. We have the NASA test bed down in Hampton. We've got 2 scanning wind lidars. So a lidar can see dirt and dust, laser. It can track the Doppler movement and the speed and the wind speed. So we see the winds up to 6,000 feet in a 20-kilometer area when the weather conditions allow it. And that's how you get superior data. You get a volume of wind data today the models, which are, again, I want to emphasize how amazing they are for what they do, but our models can't tell you exactly what the winds are at 300 feet. We see errors of 50%. I fly the Meteor drone, and I'm shocked at sometimes how much the models are off. That impacts your battery power, distance you can fly, your weight, hitting your waypoints on a BB loss to make sure you're on time for your deconfliction. I could go on. And now we have to get into the microclimate data sets in order, because this system that we're building for drones requires that level of fidelity. And if you don't have a pilot, how do you get that level of fidelity?
Well, it does. And, Don, something I learned actually, because John McBride from Autel was in your clubhouse, was saying with the the VTOL drones, his Dragonfish,
right,
that those winds could cause a catastrophic operational
right,
failure if they're pushing down. So at the wrong time. So, just very significant. By the way, Chris Janiseth has a great question out here. So I want to ask that. Chris is a super fan. So are you deploying more of the same sensors at a lower altitude to get data, or is there new technology being used to collect? I mean, I think your picture, the slide that we had up, had some images of some of these sensors, but are they new? Can you answer his question?
Oh, no, we don't. TruWeather, we believe strongly in the definition of insanity, which is you try to do the same thing over and over again and try to get a different result. That's what we've been trying to do in aviation weather for years. We're trying to use the same kind of sensors. They're expensive. They're really not getting the job done, even for general aviation and helicopters. No, we're using new sensors. We're using advanced technology. That's what I was talking about earlier, is that we're unlocking this technology that hasn't gotten into aviation weather system because of various reasons. And one of them is regulations, which we'll talk about later. We're also working on fixing that regulatory issue to allow us to use these other sensors in operations for aviation decisions. So no, this is all new, cutting edge, and we've built a platform specifically to solve this problem. And we started it 5 or 6 years ago because we knew it was going to take a while for us to get this thing off and running, but we also knew we had to change the rules. And that's what we're working with the FAA on right now. So these sensor types that we're talking about here will be allowed under future rules. And there's a standard out there called ASTM F38, which we'll talk about later. But that standard is going to become somewhat accepted and by the FAA. We're working with the FAA. FAA has been awesome on this. FAA, by the way, everyone complains about, FAA slow, whatever. I will tell you, the weather folks and the flight standard guys that I've been working with, they know about this problem. They're excited that there's actually commercial companies helping to solve the problem faster than it would have happened otherwise. And they're on board with these new standards. So no, it's all good new stuff, cutting edge stuff.
And for Chris and everybody out there, we're not going to have time to dive deeply into all these sensors, but if you go on TruWeather's website, my website, P3 Tech Consulting, under product releases, we did a video with Don where he very specifically talks about all of these different the sensor network that he's using to blanket the country. So check that out. We do have a couple more questions. Gosh, we have so much to cover. So we've got Scott F out there saying, not sure if it can be, but has or can AI be leveraged to any degree to help solve this problem?
So yeah, AI could be leveraged, but I'm glad you asked this question. Remember that to do good AI, you have to have a training data set that's accurate, right? That's the number one rule. And there are people out there that are claiming that we can improve weather prediction and understanding with AI, but they're not using accurate data sets to run them. So the way we understand our historical weather data in the United States, which is important, you have to have a historical data set, right? So you have to go back and train, is that it's all based on a model. We don't have enough real data to actually build an AI training data set with real data above the ground.
So it's like garbage in, garbage out.
So the model, what we do is we look at the data we do have, which is not very sparse, above the ground, below 5,000 feet. We then try to fit that to a physical analysis of what we think the atmosphere would look like with that data, and we fill in all the gaps with these equations that may or may not be accurate because we don't have real data. And then we put that away and say this is an historical data set, and sometimes it's at 25-kilometer resolution. So yes, the answer is we can use AI, but you have to have the right data. And so closing the gaps with these new data sets is going to allow us to significantly improve AI and the use of AI in short range weather prediction, and will help to solve this problem. But you got to get the data.
No, absolutely. And who's paying for this data, Don? Because Chris Genesis did some magic math out there. 19,000 cities at 80,000 a pop is like over $1 billion price tag to deploy. Who's paying for this?
What's going to happen is you got to change your mindset about weather. I mean, unfortunately, we've gotten to a position here in this country where everyone expects free weather data because the government has provided free weather data. But I always tell people that free is not free, because we're seeing a 30%, 40% attrition rate right now in drone operations for weather that shouldn't be that high. So everyone is spending money now trying to work around the weather. And so I've done the math on this, and I'll give you some math. And I love the question though. No, it's a good question. The math is you amortize the cost through services across millions and millions of operations that are happening every day. And so I'll give you an example. If you're talking about an air taxi that's flying, I'm going to use air taxi as an example. Now, I'm very confident that drone operators will pay 15 cents a flight eventually for this data, because I'm going to save you 60 cents a flight. And now you have to prove that, right? And that's what we're going to do down in Dallas, Fort Worth, which we're going to bring an economist in to prove that, because I know people don't believe it, right? Because you can't believe a weather guy, right? Who trusts a weather guy? They're only right half the time. But on the air taxi thing, let me give you an example. So if you're flying eight missions a day or 30 missions a day, and you're trying to get from LAX out to some suburban area to vertiport, and I know the weather tax is going to be 30%. I know this, and you think that you're going to generate $5 million a year in revenue with that aircraft. I could tell you that I'm confident you're going to generate 3.5 million. It means you're dropping, you're losing 1.5 million to the weather tax. Now, what I know is I can get you back 30% of that with the right sensor suites. I'm talking about the right ones, not the ones everyone is used to using. And if I could get you back $500,000 per aircraft a year because of better weather data for revenue, how much are you willing to pay for that, right? So my argument is, if I go to your CFO and I say, I'll sell you a package of services for that one aircraft for $100,000 a year, and I'll save you $500,000. That's a no-brainer, right? If I walk into any company and I offer that kind of deal, who's not going to take that deal? Well, that's what we're talking about here. And that money is going to pay for the infrastructure and the weather services that are going to be able to do this. Now, there'll be some areas that will have better coverage than others, because it's going to be like the cell phone tower services, right? You didn't put cell phone towers where people didn't have cell phones, right? So we're going to focus the energy around the highest density areas where the business case justifies it. And then you'll have your small drone operators that'll be able to use that data. You'll have your larger AAM, regional airport to regional airport operators. You'll have your air taxis. And by the way, this data is now going to be used for other verticals that don't have this data that need it. So my argument here is that the data will get paid for because it'll make sense to ROI. You guys will want to pay for it. And we'll be able to drive that cost down. The more people that use it, the lower the cost becomes. So it's a very good business model. I've been looking at this for about 15 years. I know the government can't pay for it. But if local municipalities buy a sensor or a couple of sensors, they can actually resell that data through us. Also, they can have a cost collection from that, because the weather service will buy data from third-party providers, and I know how to get that into the system. So the business model is there. It's just complex for people to really get their head around. But the bottom line is you got to believe. If you believe that there's a problem, and you understand that problem, we do have a solution, and you have to just go with that and understand it's not going to be the way you've been thinking about weather for 20, 30 years. It's going to be a totally different approach.
Yeah, and like I said, everybody, go check out the video I did with Don about the weather sensors if you want to get a deeper appreciation. I mean, some of these sensors are little tiny anemometers that can actually go on the top of a drone that only cost a couple $100. So, we're not talking millions of dollars necessarily. It's a wide range, a lot of different types. So check that out. But Don, I want to talk about the types of services that TruWeather offers. You know, you're working with all of your partners to put out these sensors. And then, you know, what are you doing with this information? What kind of services are out there?
Well, first of all, if there are no extra sensors, we have still the best mix of weather data. We pull in the best of the best. The beauty about TruWeather is we're agnostic. We'll work with other weather companies if they have a better solution. If they work with us, we'll integrate it. We want people to look at us as the Uber weather integrators for the UAS and AM industry, because it's very hard for an end user to figure out what to use, right? And that's why we call ourselves TruWeather. Honestly, it wasn't because we're more accurate, although we will be. It's because we're true to the science and we're true to the customer. And we'll tell you if something is not, if it's not worth the cost to do something for weather, because it's just not, not within the state of the science to do it. You know, people who say, I'm going to look at a weather app 10 days out and make a decision about whether I'm going to fly or not, that's ridiculous, right? We know that's going to change 50 times. I would never sell you that. I would tell you that don't do that, right? We're going to work with you to tell you what the state of science is, what's the right decision points to make certain decisions based on the science and based on what we know we can deliver. That's going to give you a reasonable opportunity of success. And so that's one thing we bring to our forecast weather services. We have live forecaster consulting. You guys, there are people who could talk to meteorologists if they decide that their business case justifies paying for an on-demand discussion. We also will do that sensor gap analyses and optimization. So we'll look at all the data that is available. We'll understand where the gaps are for the mission you want to fly. So every concept of operation is different. And anyone who thinks in the future that a weather provider is as simple as plugging in a data source from an API, they really don't understand. You're not going to get back your 30% on the weather tax. You're just going to continue to operate with the same weather challenges you have today and the same impacts to revenue. You have to bring money to the table in order to make money. And so the way to do that is you look at where your sensors are and not, and then we fill those gaps in. And some of these sensors are not very expensive, like Jordan was saying. We could get a $700 wind sensor on top of a tower, and that data is unimaginably better than what you're getting from your app today. And it's $700 for the sensor. So my point is there's very smart solutions here that can make people money that we can implement through our optimization. And then we integrate all that data and we bring it together in a single one-stop shop. And the key there is a lot of people like to shop for weather in the aviation business. Shopping for weather usually means they're trying to find somebody that tells them it's good. I don't know why you would do that. I mean, honestly, I think you would want to know what is bad, right? So you can do your risk management approach. But the bottom of the line is we're going to bring that end to end, and you're going to get a very simple insight, go, no go, using our mission cast, using our alerting, and all this data feeds that, and it makes it for a much better output and outcome.
And so the product is called V360, and that's got the go, no go mission cast. And all of this sensor data, first of all, your system is sensor agnostic, is that right? Like, so you can plug and play with system other sensors, and it will go into your system, fuse that data. You then do an analysis, and on top of that, people can call a human being if they have additional questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. That's and the plug and play nature of our sensors is powerful. There's not many weather companies that can do scaling SaaS software as a service like we do. And have plug and play sensors. Now we have about 7 or 8 different sensors today we can plug and play. We can't do all of them yet, but we'll work with you on that to figure out what's the right solution. And if you have a sensor that you think you need, we can work on integrating that. But the plug and play is you plug it in and it shows up in your API feed. You plug it in or it shows up on our dashboard, our graphical interface. And that's the power of TruWeather.
That is awesome. Don, you have been thinking about weather since you were 7 years old, deeply about this particular industry, as you said, since 2015, or probably even before that in the military, because you were seeing drone and crewed aircraft operations. Tell us a little bit about the thought leadership you've been involved in at the national and global level.
Yeah, so keep in mind that, when I was in the Air Force, I ran operations that had over 500,000 weather briefings a year. And I'm sorry, in my career. And I never had one come back as an aircraft accident. So my people, I understand how to solve these problems and do it safely. And when we worked in the TACC, the Tanker Airlift Control Center at Air Mobility Command, we were overseeing 100,000 missions a year, flying around the world, tanker and airlift missions. And they were averaging 5,000 weather delays a year when I got there in 2000. And then we built a risk management framework, a data performance standard type risk management framework that we sold to the two-star. And in 1 year, we cut the delays from 5,000 to 1,800 a year. We saved.
Whoa.
So that's what we're implementing in TruWeather. And to do that, though, we also recognize that these sensors that we want to get out, and it's not just TruWeather, by the way, anyone benefits from this. We have to change the standard. So I started getting heavily involved in some of the policy stuff in 2017 and 18. NASA and Deloitte were running a project up in LA, and I showed up, and they were developing the advanced air mobility ConOps for the future. The urban air, at the time we were calling it UAM, right? Urban air mobility.
Yep.
And so basically, to their credit, and again, I want to give NASA a lot of credit. NASA has really been reaching out to small businesses and the innovators out there and really trying to understand how they can get ahead of the challenges rather than react to them. And so to their credit, they allowed me to contribute to writing the UAM weather ConOps, which goes through all the stages, ULM 1, 2, 3, out to 2032, 2036. And I helped them lay out that roadmap in there for weather science and technology that I knew was available that could be quickly assimilated and integrated. And that's how today we're working on these projects and we're gaining data out at Hampton. And so we're understanding how to use this data now and get it out and make it scalable. And I've been working with NASA on that. And then also working with the FAA on how do we change the standard for weather. Today, you can only use approved sources, right, which are mostly government.
That's what I was just going to ask you because, we're talking about changing the standard, but what's the concern with the standard we have today?
Limited because it was written, most of the weather service, worst of aviation weather rules were really started in 1940s, right? And even a METAR, like why are we asking Part 107 pilots to go through the pain? I would use a word in front of that starts with an A, blank pain, to learn how to decode a METAR when it's really not necessary anymore because you have everything's translated. The METAR was invented because you only had a teletype and you had 140 characters and you had to describe what was happening at an aerodrome and get that out to people, right? Well, we could do a lot better than that. We're not Twitter, right? 140 character limitation. We could do other things. So that's where it starts. And then you can't, it's hard to change stuff, right? You only can use certified instruments that have gone through extensive certification and validation. And you kind of had a monopoly on ASOSs, and they drove the cost up, like they're 250.
What's that acronym stand for, ASOS?
Automated weather systems at airports, right? These are the weather systems. Thank you. So when I saw, helicopter pilots, their choice today at landing, they get a windsock or an ASOS. So it's either a windsock or a $500,000 piece of equipment. It's ridiculous, right? There's so many good sensors out there today. Sensor technology has advanced. So what I wanted to do is say, look, I have an idea, FAA. Let's look at how we can change the standard so we can make it a performance-based weather standard, and we can bring in these new sensor technologies as long as we know what data we're getting, where it's coming from, and how good it is. And there's ways to do that to quantify the standard, the accuracy of these data weather reports. We have a lot of techniques in meteorology that we can use to do nearest neighbor and checks and all this. Let's implement all this modern technology and science and let's change it. So to their credit, the FAA said, yes, we got to do this because we've been putting our head in the sand on weather for so many years, making believe there's not a problem. But then I talked to Rex Alexander and he tells me how many times he almost lost his lunch trying to land, at an airport in an urban area where the winds are blowing around the building and having no weather measurements.
And so by the way, Rex Alexander is if you guys don't know him, he's like the king of vertiports, a helicopter pilot for the Army, former helicopter pilot, and CEO of 5 Alpha, good friend. We love
Really
Rack.
good. And so
Yeah,
his
but
his
that's scary,
stories
you know,
his
like
stories
that,
drive me. Yeah.
that he's saying like, you know, he almost crashed multiple times because they had like zero weather awareness flying the helicopter.
So this problem's always been there. We just ignored it, right? So now we got a solution, and even in Europe, they didn't have weather as a mandatory service in their use space. USS, Unmanned Aerial Systems Service Supplier, and the reason they told me is because they didn't know what to do with weather. They just didn't know what to do with it. So when they saw the standard in draft, they said, "Boy, you've given us the roadmap now." So we're working on testing this standard. This standard will allow the use of different types of weather data not allowed today, IoT type things. And that's going to help us close the gaps because now people will invest in data because it's not as expensive to help them fill these gaps. And then TruWeather will be there to capture all this data and turn it around, and you'll be legal to use, right? And so
So Don, it's ASTM that is creating the standard. What's the, is it 38? What's the working group?
38 working group on the ASTM. Yep. And the standard still has to be, adopted by the civil aviation authorities around the world, including the FAA. But what they're going to do is work with us not just us, but other weather companies to figure out now how do we actually do the methods and means of compliance of validating and quantifying data sources without having to go through the certification process of the past. And we're working with them on that. And there's money FAA's got research money to do this. I like to think I was part of helping to get that money because I was making that business case to the FAA and through the people in the FAA taking that forward to their leadership.
Yeah.
And so now, this is going to come together, and we'll probably see an advisory circular in about 2 years that says you can do all this, use these services. But in the interim, what we're going to do is we're going to do what the rest of the industry's been doing in the UAM, UAS, is test and demonstrate capabilities under waivers and controlled environments. And
now,
so,
how does that work with the new, what is it called, the NTAP? What does that stand for again?
Near-term authority process or near-term application process, one or the other.
Yeah, I
but
think it's near-term application process, and that's like with UTM and the FAA.
The whole idea there is, we've had these IPPs, I call them, Beyond Program and FAA, and they've allowed, operators have been putting in waivers for exemptions to fly BVLOS. What they're trying to do in the FAA is build templates so that you can pick a use case that matches your template, and you don't have to go through the process of, it'll be a much quicker approval process for what you want to do. And so whether, to the credit of the FAA is third-party weather providers or other service providers in UTM will be allowed to use this waiver process also. And so what we're gonna do is put in a package, and we're gonna have different use cases for different operations, drone delivery, surveillance, public safety, DFR, drone first responder, drone in a box, BVLOS, and we're gonna put those in and say, here's the weather solutions that we want to test with this new standard and these new sensors, and then operators could use that under this waiver, and we would be able to start testing and demonstrating, getting data back to the FAA, right? This is how we're going to build the advisory circular. And so we're going to be able to use these technologies before the advisory circular, and it will be approved, and everyone will be able to take advantage of this before. And one more thing real quick. So we're going to be putting some sensors out in Fort Worth. NASA's funding us to put out another round of high-resolution sensors around Tarrant County. And as you know, the FAA key site is in that area. And there's operators and UTMs that are all going to be operating. I call it the sandbox for BVLOS. TruWeather will be bringing in this much better data and offering that up for free for several months, maybe 6 months, to operators under the key site through the NTAP. That's my plan. We got to get all that paperwork in, and we got to get it approved. But and then be able to test and validate some of this with their operations. So this is what we're planning on. Really is bringing this all together in Fort Worth And hopefully that's going to lay the groundwork for scalability, right? We just start punching that around the country. And that's the goal.
Yeah, the first time I heard about the Fort Worth, because again, everybody thinks, like you said, they think about the test sites. They think of the IVP and beyond locations, which were all officially approved. And, Dallas Fort Worth isn't one of those, but, they're going to be starting in December. And that's really exciting to see other states and other locations doing real world operations under these exemptions, pulling in data like your weather data to make this a reality. I think it's hugely important. I mean, hell, Europe's been doing this with U-Space for a while, right? Their Gulf of Finland trials, very similar. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And weather was called out in the Gulf of Finland. And by the way, they call them I always get corrected by a good friend of mine. Her name is Marilyn Pearson. She used to work for the FAA. Now she works for SAE. And she's been a real champion of this and helping me she's a Sherpa to keep me out of trouble. It's waivers, not exemptions. She would say
waivers. Right there. No, words matter, and there's waivers, there's exemptions, there's deviations. Yeah. All in my drone law textbook, by the way. Chris Genesis has another question. We're not going to be able to get to this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook you and Chris up offline so you can continue the conversation, because he's talking about some other non-weather use cases and whether your system can aggregate that data. But I'll let you guys have that conversation offline. What I want to talk about, because we only have about 3 minutes left, you've got so much going on. The Dallas Fort Worth thing is new. You've got Hampton Roads. You've got New Air. You've got Grand Sky, which we talked about on the Dawn of Drones last year with Tom Sawyer. With Tom from Grand Sky and the Meteo drone. Going all the way up. Gosh, I don't know if it's getting up to 16,000 feet.
We got to 9,000. We got to 9,000, wow. And we're working to 16,900. But Tom, I want to give him a call out, man. He's doing amazing things at Grand Sky. Amazing. The guy, every day he awees me.
He is, and I don't know if you're heading up to Grand Forks.
Be next week.
Next week, I'm not going to make it this year, but folks, if you've got the time and the inclination, I'd say head up to North Dakota. It's a great event, the UAS Summit every year. I want to ask you in the last couple minutes.
So I want to call out Washington Airport in North Carolina and Earl, and what they've done is they've got one of the wind lidars out there, and they love it, and they've been a leader, and I want to call them out also. So Washington Airport, North Carolina.
Very cool. Awesome. So Don, in the few minutes we have left, anything new coming up, any big announcements? And then of course, please at the end, let people know how they can reach you.
Well, I think the announcement really I've kind of talked about a little bit today is the Fort Worth project. We're very excited that we're going to be able to bring this amazingly high resolution data to the key site area. We're working with North Texas Council of Governors, Ernest Huffman, who's been a great advocate, Chris Ash out at Hillwood, and there's others out in that area. I always fail to remember who I forget to talk about. I want to talk about Choctaw and James Grimsley. That whole area there, they're running, they're really looking at putting in a corridor, right, from Fort Worth up to Choctaw, and we're in the middle of that, and I'm excited about it. And I think Fort Worth is the first anchor location that we are going to start laying in this heavier infrastructure and testing some of these concepts and proving that ROI that somebody brought up, which, by the way, I respect that. We got to prove it. And that's really the next big thing for us, really, and the NTAP and getting that NTAP approval, right, and things like that.
No, that's great. And, I know it's James's vision with Choctaw to connect his area in Durant, Oklahoma to that Dallas-Fort Worth area through air taxis and eVTOLs eventually. And everybody, if you have not visited the Choctaw hotel and casino in Durant, it is like ridiculous. I mean, I've been to Vegas a lot, and this casino like blew me away. And as I was by the way, fun fact, everybody, I've got a PBS special coming up in November on drones and eVTOL. Choctaw's on there. That's when I stayed there. And as me and the two PBS guys we're driving out, there's a sign that says "Tonight Journey." And I'm like, why are we leaving? Anyway, it is what it is. I'm a 90s hair band fan, 80s rock band fan, but
You're a boomer. You're a boomer.
yeah. So Don, we are at time. What a whirlwind this has been, as it always is with you. There's so much to talk about and cover. How do people reach out to you?
Well, you get me at don.berchoff at trueweathersolutions.com. No E in True Weather, TRU. Also, you can check out True Weather on LinkedIn. Lisa Tinnis is doing a great job of getting out a lot of stuff there. You can reach us on a contact form at our website at trueweather.com, and Lisa will make sure we address that. So yeah, those are some of the best ways. You can always just write me an email. Like I said, I'm very approachable about this. I like to hear the stories. I like to understand what the pain points are, and I like to talk about the things that people are having trouble believing are possible, because it really is. The technology's there, the will's there, the rules are going to be there. Let's not stifle the system because of our lack of creativity or outside the box thinking. Let's move forward. And I think that's really the power of being in this industry, right? There's so much good in this industry. I got fired up yesterday. I'm up here at the Tram Conference Summit, and I was just, Bronwyn was interviewing me, and I was getting excited about the fact that you have all this new technology we can use. Let's take advantage of it, right? Let's make it happen. So
I'm sorry I missed that. Bronwyn Morgan, CEO of Zeo Air. We are all three of us are members of Ultra, the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association, from the beginning of when that was formed. But all good friends. So anyway, well, we are a little over time actually, Don, and we're gonna have to wrap this up. So everybody out there, thank you so much for your engagement, your questions. Get in touch with Don if you have anything further. Everybody, we are out here.